Hi again. Today we're going into a book about the history of a special forces operation. This is The Siege by Ben Macintyre. Now, this happened on the 6th of May 1980, and I was in Bristol on a protection job at the time. It was bank holiday, and I came back to the hotel and I phoned home, and I was told that the siege had happened. Obviously, it had been going on for almost a week and it was on the daily news, but suddenly the resolution by the SAS came as a surprise, and it was filmed live and repeated on news broadcasts for the next couple of days. So that kind of brought the SAS to the attention of the general public. And the events of that day and the days leading up to it are very, very well covered in this book. There's been several previous books, and I've reviewed some of them here. But this one is the latest, and it's by an author who has specialised in military history, special forces history, and espionage history. And he's got excellent sources, including being given access to the archives of the SAS Regimental Association. The embassy takeover occurred when 6 young men from Iran, from the area which was called Arabistan, stormed the embassy. Now, the police officer on duty from the Diplomatic Protection Group, DPG, Trevor Locke, had actually stepped into the vestibule to have a brew. And he was quickly overpowered and taken prisoner along with everyone else, over 40 people in the embassy. Now, I know there has been criticism in the past, the fact that he wasn't actually standing where he should have been on the steps leading in, but it wouldn't have made any difference anyway. But as it happened, he, in those days, the armed police had to keep their firearms out of sight when they were on public duties. So he had his pistol, which was just a 5-shot Smith, tucked in a pocket, and he had his overcoat on over it. So throughout the siege, he managed to retain his pistol, mainly because this image of the unarmed policeman had spread to Iran, and they never even thought that he would be armed. So that was his ace in the hole, as it were. And he really, his presence was very much a steadying influence throughout the siege, with both the British hostages, and there were several Brits there, and the Iranians, both the staff and the visitors. And he played a very important part, helping to conduct the negotiations and so on, and then actually played a very active part at the end, and became quite heroic, to be frank. Now, putting it into perspective, at that time, the training of the authorised firearms officers was pathetic, and the DPG didn't get in anything special in the way of training. That's all changed now. It's a very, very different armed police that we have, the standard of the armed police throughout the country is high. It's a long training process, and the Met particularly has a lot of experience. There's a lot of armed operations, but back in 1980 it was completely different. So he had a 5-shot revolver with very little training, and really what he did was the right thing. Now, the guys who took over the embassy, Ben Macintyre has a degree of sympathy with their cause, and I think most people really would agree that they were an oppressed people. Their treatment by the Ayatollah regime in Iran was terrible, and there was a lot of atrocities and so on. So they did have a case. However, it never justifies violence, kidnapping, hostage taking, and eventually murder, as happened. Also, they were stooges to an extent, puppets in the machinations of Saddam Hussein in his campaign against Iran. And the other thing was that they totally misread the situation. There was no way that Britain could really have acceded to their demands, and particularly with Maggie Thatcher as Prime Minister. She was fairly recent into the job, hadn't really established herself as the Iron Lady, but her temperament was there, and unlike Edward Heath, who was prevailed to release the hijacker Layla Khalid by the Americans, there was no such pressure here, and she was determined that the terrorists would be arrested. So as soon as the takeover was known, the Met put quite massive resources into action. Firstly, the DPG, Diplomatic Protection Group, they had fast response motorcyclists, armed motorcyclists, and they were on the scene pretty quickly. Then the SPG, which at that time was the Specialised Support Unit, Special Patrol Group, re-emerged later as the Territorial Support Group, TSG. Then you had the hard dogs to help cordon off the area, stop people escaping. You had C-13, the anti-terrorist branch, and also special branch, heavy presence of them. Then you had the negotiators. The Met had set up a cell of negotiators. They'd had some other sieges, non-political sieges, and they realised that negotiating was a tool that they should have, and they'd sent some detectives on specialised courses, and these proved to be invaluable. For the greater part of the siege, they were the ones who really were doing the most important work in really keeping the lid on things and keeping people alive. Also on hand was MI5. They had quite a strong presence there, probably a couple of dozen guys, many of whom were technicians who quickly got involved in a technical attack on the embassy to gain both audio and visual information as to what was happening. And while this was being done, the police came up with a hasty plan if people were being killed, how they would try to effect a rescue, which at that time was beyond the resources of even the specialised firearms unit D11, who were also on the scene, both as potential assaulters and as snipers. The book is very, very detailed on the conversations and interactions both within the embassy, between the terrorists and the hostages, and amongst the hostages, and amongst the various groups of the hostages, and so on. As you may imagine, it was a very, very tense and stressful time. The conversations and actions of the police in their specialised control room, and also the politicians, which for the first time was revealed the existence of COBRA, the Cabinet Office Briefing Room Assembly, which was the crisis management team of top cabinet ministers. Right from the beginning, on the first day, the SP team, Special Projects team, which had been set up in 1972 by the SAS, was activated, and the on-duty SP team was B Squadron, and they sent firstly a headquarter element by helicopter. This was the CO, the staff officer, and signaller. And then the rest of the guys, who were formed up into two teams, red and blue, convoyed down in a variety of vehicles, Range Rovers and Pantex, and got there late afternoon, early evening, and red team, who were the designated first response, snuck into the building next to the embassy, which was known to them as the doctor's house, and immediately started working on the immediate action. And this was basically, if murder started taking place, everything started going wrong, they would ram a vehicle through the front door and fan out and spread aggressively through the embassy in room combat mode. Excuse me. Okay, we'll just pause a second to discuss Ben Macintyre and his sources. Now, first of all, he has interviewed the officers concerned. The commanding officer, who at the time was Lieutenant Colonel Mike Rose, the HQ staff officer Jeremy Phipps, and the ops officer Ian Crook, who later for a short time actually was officer commanding B Squadron during the Falklands. And most significantly, Hector Gullen, who was officer commanding B Squadron at the time. And Hector came from the Parachute Regiment, but he'd also served in the Commando Brigade, so he had his airborne wings and his commando beret before going into the SAS. And he was quite a formidable figure. And it was his job to come up with the plan. And so basically over the next several days, that's what was being compiled. And the lads were working on studying imagery, memorizing faces of both the hostages, the X-rays, and the Yankees, and the terrorists, the X-rays. And they were given index cards with these details on them. They also undertook rehearsals. They had floor plans, and they had models that were made, which included little plastic figures which they modified to look like the terrorists. They put moustaches on them and things like this. And some of the guys who were designated to do the abseil descent, they went off to a police premises and did some abseil training. And it just shows that even these guys, who are the most experienced counter-terrorist / hostage rescue team in the world, were still very, very aware of the importance of training, repetitive, recent training, as much as possible. And they assembled all the kit, and Mr. Macintyre goes into quite a bit of details about the specialised breaching equipment they had, the different kinds of stun grenades, the original G60, which was built against a requirement by 22 SAS, and the later L29, which combined the stun grenade with a CR element, which CR is a very potent type of irritant gas, which increases the disorientating and subduing effect. One of the things that has been disclosed for the first time in this book is the role of a female operator from 14th Int, the Det. She was from East Det, and I won't say any more because it's in the book, and you can find out for yourself what her intended role was. So over the several days, Hector finalised the deliberate stronghold assault plan. Multiple entry points at multiple levels, distractions, code words, reserve troops, snipers. Altogether, this was Op Nimrod. As the negotiators worked their verbal magic, the idea was, because the technical people, they sent a phone on an extension cord into the stronghold, and by working out the length, they knew where the terrorists were, or so they thought. So while they were on this phone, it was assumed that they were in the immediate vestibule of the building, and above it was a kind of skylight, a light well with a skylight, and the idea was to lower a distraction charge, a very heavily explosive distraction charge into that, initiate the whole operation with that, and in the words of Hector Gullen, give the lead terrorist a very close haircut. There'd be a mass of masonry and glass falling on him, and that would take him out of the action, and that would also signal the assault. As it happened, a lot of the intelligence were faulty. Hostages weren't where they're supposed to be, terrorists weren't where they were supposed to be, and they had somehow worked out that they could take this extension cord higher, and the terrorist was actually up on the staircase. Another problem, famously, was one of the abseilers was hung up on the rope, a lark's head knot around the figure eight, and he was slowly being roasted before the assault even actually started, before the initiation of the distraction device. So no plan survives contact with the enemy, and right from the beginning it was starting to go pear-shaped. However, despite the faulty int, which was due to the state of the art at the time, the devices weren't that panoramic, then it was a successful operation due to the fact that the lads were able to adapt. Adaptability being one of the qualities sought in the SAS soldier. So years of room combat in all different environments, all different options, working as a team, working in small and large numbers, flowing together, working off each other, working under CS gas atmospheres, CR gas atmospheres, bangs going off, noise, hostages rushing around. That was their bread and butter, and so they were able to adapt. Okay, final point on the book. Returning to the sources, as I said, the book interviewed the officers, and I think it was the first time Hector Gullin had ever spoken in public, and so that was solid gold. But then there were approximately 60 guys involved in the operation, and only 4 of the guys are actually named by their real names. There's another 9 given pseudonyms, but there's no distinction between which names are real and which names are false. So for me that seemed a bit strange. Okay, I'm sure there was 1 or 2 who didn't want their names used, but make it clear that this is a pseudonym, because this book will be referenced in future books, I'm sure. I've seen mistakes from books repeated throughout other works. People quote them as being gospel. So that to me, that's a fairly important point. Particularly since several of the guys who are given pseudonyms, their names are out in the public domain. In fact, some of them have written books themselves, and several of them are dead. So, I don't really see why that had to be done. There were a handful of medals given out, and significantly, Hector Gullin wasn't given a medal. Now, he already was the holder of a military cross from Operation Storm out in Oman, but if anybody deserved a medal, or if any officer deserved a medal, it was surely Hector Gullin. It was his plan, it was his squadron that performed. And then finally, the whole operation was a massive deterrence, and terrorists never again attempted to take over an embassy for political aims. So the SAS had both a national success but a global success as well. And the book is highly detailed on this. Ben Macintyre, he's got a great writing style as well, makes the stuff come alive, and very, very readable, and it's a real addition to the literature of that particular operation.